Welcome back. This is part 2 of our conversation with Morgan Hurley, fire protection engineer with Jensen Hughes. Can you explain how someone becomes licensed as a fire protection engineer?
Sure. To become licensed as a fire protection engineer, there's multiple steps to go through. The first is to graduate with an engineering degree from an accredited engineering school. The next step is to successfully complete the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, also known as the EIT or Engineer in Training exam. Then there's a requirement for professional experience, ranges from 2 to 4 years depending on which state you're in. And then the final step is completion of the Principles and Practices of Engineering exam, or PE exam. Once one passes that PE exam, and if they've completed those other steps, then they can become licensed as a professional engineer. Licensure as a professional engineer is state specific. If I'm licensed in Illinois, that doesn't automatically mean I can practice engineering in Kentucky. I'd have to go through a process called comedy, not comedy, but comedy or reciprocity to have my license from Illinois recognized in Kentucky.
How are building and fire codes developed and adopted in the United States?
So in many countries around the world, the national or federal government sets the minimum fire protection standards. That's not the way it works in the United States. Every state, and in some cases localities within states, are responsible for developing their own building and fire codes. That's a lot of work for all these states and municipalities to develop their own building or fire codes. So they rely on these things called model codes that are developed by private organizations like the National Fire Protection Association or the International Code Council, which develops model codes, right? So they have committees that develop these codes. These codes are published generally about once every 3 years. And then all a state or a locality has to do is they could say, okay, I'm going to adopt this code, and here's some amendments I'm going to make to tailor it so it fits well in my state or my locality.
Why do you need building and fire codes? Couldn't we just leave it up to the building or business owners to make sure that there's adequate safety?
Well, every reputable building owner or business owner is going to want their building to be fire safe, without a doubt. But society has a responsibility to define what's the minimum level of safety. And that's what these fire codes and building codes do, is they establish that minimum level of safety. That's kind of what society expects from their buildings. They want to know that if somebody enters a building, is that building going to be safe?
So we've discussed how codes are developed and adopted. Can you touch on enforcement?
Sure. Building and fire code enforcement usually occurs at a state level or at a locality level. So whether it's at a state level or it's at a local level, there's usually a building official. They're going to enforce the building code when a new building's built or when a building is altered. But then there's also fire officials like a fire marshal, and what they're going to do is enforce a fire code that is intended to verify that that building remains safe from fire.
Can you summarize how fire protection engineers and local enforcers or state enforcers work with fire equipment distributors to ensure there's adequate safety?
So in complex buildings, there's usually a fire protection engineer on the design team. So they're assisting architects and other engineers with making sure that building's going to be safe from fire. And then there's generally an enforcement official, like a building official or a fire marshal. They're going to review the work that the fire protection engineer performed to verify, yeah, okay, they got that right, okay. But at the end of the day, many buildings are complicated, right? Building owners want their building to be a little nicer than the one that's right next door, right? So they're pushing the envelope, and that's where the fire protection engineer and the equipment manufacturers can work together and say, okay, I have this fire challenge. It's not addressed very well by these model codes and standards that I mentioned because they didn't really consider this specific application. So the fire protection engineer can work with the manufacturer and say, okay, what can we come up with that's going to work for this specific building?
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
I was happy to be here.
And thank you for watching this episode of Brooks Equipment's FireTech Talk. Please be sure to like and subscribe.